Now, next week is Akri Mot, which is actually one of my favorite ones because it's a Yom Kippur service. Now, normally, Tazria and Metzora, last week's Torah portion and this week's Torah portion is usually one. But when we have a leap year, they break up the really long portions into two different portions. And so that's why we got actually a very short lesson this week. So we are on Metzora, chapter 14, and it's actually the second part of Tazria, which is leprosy. So let's go to chapter 14, verse 1. Who wants to read?
I got it.
All right.
Adonai said to Moshe, "This is to be the law concerning the person afflicted with Zarat on the day of his purification." Hold on, I want to change my reading. All right. "This shall be the Torah of the leper of the day of the cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest shall look and see if the leprosy is healed in the leper. Then the priest shall command, and he shall take for him who is to be cleansed 2 live and clean birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet, and hyssop. And the priest shall command, and he shall slay one of the birds in an earthen vessel over running water. Let him take the live bird, and the cedar wood, and the scarlet, and the hyssop, and dip them in the live bird, and the live bird in the blood of the bird that was slain over the running water. And he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed from the leprosy, and shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the live bird loose in the open field. And he who is to be cleansed shall wash his garments, and shall shave off all of his hair, and wash himself in water, and shall be clean. Then after that he comes into the camp, but shall stay outside the tent 7 days. And on the 7th day it shall be that he shaves all of the hair off of his head, and his beard, and his eyebrows, even all his hair he shaves off. And he shall wash his garments and wash his body in water, and shall be clean." He's going to be a funny-looking individual with no eyebrows.
So when Beth went through her cancer, she lost all of her hair. And it didn't bother her so much. She said the part what bothered her most when she lost her eyebrows and her eyelashes. It was just, you look really weird, And so
You lost your eyelashes too?
she lost all of it. Unless you're her husband, I seen the difference.
So I wonder why he has to shave off all of his hair. He or she. I mean, that's a lot.
That's a lot. Total.
I think it's because it's like your hair it contains everything like that you've taken into your body and everything. So like shaving all of that off would be starting completely afresh.
Oh. Think about a hair follicle test.
Right.
How far does that go back?
That's what I'm saying.
From another tradition that it might correlate, hair is partly sacred because it's like our spiritual antenna, and our lives are stored in our hair. So if you needed to make a wholly new beginning, a deeply spiritual way to do that would to just shave your hair off. And to back that up, the Army took in Native American tractors, and the first thing they did was shave their hair off, and they lost their ability to track so well.
Oh, yes.
So they changed it around so that they would be able to
Okay.
cut their hair.
Okay, so we're on to something then. Something else just realized. Why is the Israeli military wanting the people? I mean, if you're in the Israeli military, the problem is their generals are trained right here in the United States. Most of them, all the generals have been to one of the big colleges, blah, 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 and then they go back to Israel. And the Israeli military, they don't want them having beards. They want them all clean shaven and all that and stuff. And if that's true, what you're saying, then it's taking away their spiritual aspect. And the same thing with Solomon. With Samson. Once they shaved everything off, then he lost all of his power. Now, his was different. He was a Nazirite from birth, but what you're talking about is there's the same principle, exactly. And so reason I'm bringing up the Israeli military is because, you know, first of all, they need God. They don't need, you know, the generals over there, a lot of them have said that we need to quit trusting in God and protect ourselves. And we're like, no, you can't. Only God can protect you. Israel should not exist if it wasn't for God. And so with that being said, that's one of the biggest problems with the Israeli military, and the same as our military. They want their military clean shaven and everybody proper and blah, 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 but they're taking away their strength by doing that. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. From a different perspective, but it's the same thing.
Well, I thought about that when she said what she did, so it all tied in together.
Exactly. And that is what's going on in the Israeli military. You know, now you got the Haredim, they're wanting to start forcing the Haredim to enlist, and of course they don't make them shave. But if you join the Israeli military, from what I understand, it's like if you're not just solid and saying, I ain't doing it, you can forget it, then they might let you get by with it. But generally you've got to have your rabbi or somebody, you know, post it, you know, you belong to this group, and they won't make you shave your, you know, your beard and all that off. But that is funny.
From what I understand, the tradition of short hair and no facial hair actually came out from the Roman army.
But that's where we are.
That the enemy would have no less to grab onto or whatever.
Yeah,
So I'm just saying, you know, consider the source.
yeah. But that is interesting, though. I mean, it does make sense. Okay.
All right, we're in verse.
Oh, hold on. We're in verse Timmy.
But hold on. One of the things,
I got napkins right here. We're swimming over here. Timmy, no.
hey, they're in the kitchen. Oh, there's some right there. Just grab that whole thing.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm commiserating with humor.
Let me know if we need more.
I got it.
I'm gonna grab one.
All right, Timmy. That's the second drink you spilled today.
That's okay.
He's on a mission. Do you need a water baptism or something, son? Just put this back in here.
Okay.
All right, I'll throw you in the pool and then get home. Oops.
So the number one thing then is, you know, especially for the Israeli military, they quit worrying about the shaving and quit worrying about that whole, you know, that's one of the things a lot of the people have with the Israeli military is that they say you're trying to be like the American military, and that's not who we are. We're Israel. And I think it's important that people understand that. So, okay.
All right, we'll try this again. Verse 10. All right, and on the 8th day he takes two male lambs, perfect ones, and one ewe lamb, a year old, a perfect one, and 3/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil as a grain offering, and one log of oil.
Stop for a second. Something else I forgot. A leper is not allowed to go into the temple. So what happened? A lot of people, they read through that and they say, well, he comes before the Cohen. Yes and no. The Cohen goes to him. The lepers are outside the city. And so when he's cleansed of leprosy, until he's actually cleansed, he's still unclean. Now, he may not have leprosy no more. You know, it may have been done away with, but until the Cohen says, now you're clean, has to be a procedure. So the leper is outside the city, and I'm sure there's a spot where all the lepers go to that they know this is the closest to the temple they can get, and then the Kohanim actually come out to there. I'm sure they have to go out every day and say, is any leprosy cleansed today, blah, blah, blah. And if they are, then we'll go through this procedure. And so, but they don't come into the temple. The Kohen goes out to them. And then he sprinkles them 7 times. Why 7 times? Now, I don't know that we can actually answer that, but think about this. Remember the verse last week we were talking about sarat, leprosy. When a person's totally leprous, then they're pronounced clean. And it's almost like an illusion that in the world we are today, you got like 2 main thoughts of the Messiah coming. One, a lot of the rabbis say if everybody would keep one Sabbath, the Messiah would come. But then the other version is no, the world's going to be so bad the Messiah is going to have to come to stop it from being destroyed. And it's totally leprous. And they use that verse we read last week that says when a person is totally leprous, then they're pronounced clean. And so that's where we are. Now, last week we talked about leprosy and different things. What were the three things that caused leprosy?
Sean Hurrah, haughtiness, and brain fart. Greed.
Greed. And Lashon Hurrah, Miriam spoke against Moses' wife, and she became leprous. Now, this was Miriam. I mean, this was Moses' sister. Now, God did honor them. They didn't move the whole time she was leprous. There was, he honored her even though that she spoke got leprosy for that reason. Now, the other reasons were greed. That was the lepers that were, when the Syrian army was surrounding Israel, these 3 lepers were like, we're dying. Let's just go out there and turn ourselves in. And if they kill us, fine. If they don't, they'll feed us. And so they go out and turn themselves in with the Syrian army. I think it's Syrian. We're gone. They heard in the woods, they sound like a whole army coming at them, and they just fled. And these lepers walk out there, and they're like, it's a trap. They're hiding from us. They're waiting for us to come into camp, and then they're going to attack. So they went in the camp, but nobody attacked. And then they're like, they fled. So they started going through the Syrian camp and getting all the wealth and stuff and taking it back to their tents. And then one of them says, that's why we have leprosy. We got people in Jerusalem inside the city walls that are starving to death, and we're out here being greedy. And so then they went and told everybody. So that's when we know it's greed. And the other one was King Uzziah. Uzziah was the 10th king, I believe, before the nation, after the nation split. They split after Solomon. Uzziah was from the southern kingdom, a descendant of David, and he was a great king. He reigned for 54 years, the longest king reigning as far as I know of in the Tanakh. But the last 2 years of his life, he went into the temple to burn incense, which he wasn't allowed to do. So when people try to use the argument, you remember some people say, well, David ate the showbread because he was king. You can't use that argument because Uzziah was king, and God loved him dearly. He was a descendant of David, but he tried to offer an incense, which is, got showbread and incense, and he became leper immediately. So you can't say David ate the showbread because he was king. He wasn't. David ate the showbread because the priests gave it to him, and then they all paid the price. And so, it's important to understand why. And, in the New Testament, the Pharisees are attacking Yeshua, says, look at your apostles. They're eating, they're not doing this or that, whatever, right? And he says, have you not heard what David did with the showbread? So basically he's saying, I give them permission. I'm not holding them accountable. Leave them alone. That was a simple way of looking at it. But it all comes down to authority. And that's kind of what we talked about earlier today in the Drosh was that. But anyway. Okay, let's go. Where we at?
Verse 11.
Verse 11.
And the priest who is cleansing shall present the man who is to be cleansed with these offerings before Yah at the door of the tent of appointment. And the priest shall take one male lamb and bring it as a guilt offering, and the log of oil, and wave them as a wave offering before Yah.
Stop a minute. A guilt offering is called an Asham. There was one Kohen Gadol. His name was Shimon HaZedek. Shimon HaZedek was probably maybe 100 years before Messiah came. And according to the Talmud, he was the last righteous Kohen Gadol. There were a lot of, there were a lot of Kohen Gadols that were just there for a year, and they'd do something wrong, God would punish them, blah, blah, blah. But Shimon HaZedek was one of the last of the righteous. He was Kohen Gadol for a long period of time. And Shimon made the comment that he never ate the Asham of a Nazarite. Now, a Nazarite is, an Asham is like a sin offering. It's called a guilt offering, but it's a lesser degree of a sin offering. And so Shimon HaZedek said, I never eat the priests are supposed to eat the Asham of somebody being pure from Metzorah, and also of a Nazarite. But his comment was, I never eat the Asham of a Nazarite, and I'm not trying to compare them. There's a little difference here, because this is a Metzorah being cleansed. The other one's a Nazarite. But it is important what he said. I've never ate the Asham of a Nazarite. And people say, why not? He said, because they all do it for fake reasons. But there was one guy. He said, but there was one guy that came in, and I actually ate the Asham that he brought me. He said, this guy came in, he's a Nazarite, and he said, right before he cut his hair, Shimon says, man, why are you cutting off this hair? You got beautiful hair. And he said, that's why I'm cutting it off. It makes me, I think I'm super good looking or whatever. And he says, and people tell me that. And he said, that's why I'm cutting it off, so I don't, to humble himself. And Shimon says, this guy's doing it for the right reason. Because too many people do it for the wrong reason. And that was his theory. And they had thousands, I don't know how many, but I'm sure hundreds or probably thousands in a year doing a Nazarite vow. And he never would eat the asham of a Nazarite because his version were they weren't doing it for the right reason. They were doing it for show. But it don't mean that you can't do it for the right reason. So it's important to think about that.
Same way
Motive
with
is
fasting.
everything.
Exactly. And that's a point of a Nazarite. Now, this is a Metzora being cleansed, which is a little bit different story. Think about the New Testament. How many, remember the lepers that Yeshua cleansed? How many were there? At one point, there was like 10, weren't they? And then only one turned around and said, thank you. Think about that. Why were they not, why did the rest of them not come back and thank you? Did they not think you were cleansed? Or, think about it from their perspective until the priest actually says you're cleansed. You don't know if you're cleansed or not. They examine everything. But Yeshua, he healed them and cleansed them and, healed them. Then they still had, and this is important. When Yeshua healed them, what he said? He said, go to the priesthood and show yourself to the priesthood. Why? Because his procedure had to be done. Even though he healed them, he stopped the leprosy, they have to be pronounced clean by a priest.
Even though he was the high priest, he still has to follow the tradition.
Well, he's the high priest here, but on the earth is a different situation, and that's a good point. That's a real good point. So, yes, they still had the procedure they had to go through, and that's important to understand that even he respected that procedure. And, go ahead.
And it's the same thing when it says in the New Testament to do what they say and observe what they tell you to observe. But talking about,
When Yeshua was talking to them,
yes,
saying, do what the Pharisees say, but don't do what they do.
because we're still supposed to be observing the commandments and keeping the statutes and all that, not
Okay, now, but there is one thing that's really cool. Well, that's not contradictory or anything, but what was the one thing Yeshua said, I found no greater faith in all of Israel than one thing? Somebody that understood authority.
Yeah.
And who was it?
Centurion.
Centurion.
Yeah, and he was a Gentile.
And he told Yeshua, he said, you're not even worthy to come in, I'm not even worthy for you to come in my house. And Yeshua says, he said, if you just speak it, it will happen. And Yeshua says, I've not found any greater faith in all of Israel than this centurion that understood authority. That's important. And in that case, he said, like the centurion said, if you just speak it, it'll happen. I got that much faith in what you're doing, it'll happen. Because when I tell these guys to go, they will go. So there has to be some level of authority. And I will say this, and I hope I don't step on any toes. I'm glad the Messianics don't have it. Well, I mean, we can't agree with ourselves. There's so much division, so much. And the reason I'm saying that, I'm not talking about on all these others. The main issue I'm talking about is the calendar. That's why I've made it clear in the past that we follow the calendar. Whether I agree or disagree, it doesn't really matter. It was set by the Sanhedrin.
because if they're wrong, it's on them.
And that's the story of David. That's important to understand, is if they are wrong, it is on them. It ain't on me.
We're told to do it because that's what they do.
Yeah.
And when Yeshua comes back, if it's wrong, then he's going to correct all of us.
Exactly. And I'll be honest with you. Write down all the questions you think you have right now, because I would love to see the day when, when Yeshua comes back and says, this is right, this is wrong, just see how many times we were correct. Oh, man, I was wrong 75% of the time. But
I just was looking at references to lepers or leprosy, and I find it very interesting that it seems to be a very large theme in the scriptures. I mean, we think we see it a lot, but outside of the last fourth portion of this fourth portion, it's only referred to 11 times. Outside of these two, yeah. I was like, what?
I think it's because the Levitical priesthood doesn't exist, right? I mean, it exists, but
But
it's
I
not
mean,
a working thing.
if you go through the whole scriptures from Genesis to Revelation, it's 11 times outside of.
and that's a lot in the New Testament.
It's such a
Well, it
huge
seems like it,
thing.
but in the New Testament, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. Now, I'm not saying the reoccurrence of the word 11
Okay.
I just find that interesting, and it seems like it, I don't know, it just surprised me.
Well, hold on. This morning, when we were showing the 11 stars in Joseph's dream, the 11, apostles after Judas was taken away, there were 11. And so, if that's true, then,
12 with these two.
but hold on. But if that's true, then it puts leprosy at the very end, which is that whole concept of when you're completely leprous, then you're declared clean. So, I mean, if there's something to what you're saying, then it puts it all together.
I'm still not,
I was like, I wonder how many times it actually reversed, and I was surprised.
Okay.
Rabbi?
Go ahead.
I'm still not wrapping my brain around that. Maybe because I think from the perspective that leprosy, that's a disease, so how can you be declared clean after you're totally consumed with it?
We have no idea. That's one of them laws. It's kind of like the red heifer. The red heifer says this is the Torah and the law of the red heifer. And the funny thing is that even King Solomon, in all of his wisdom, he said, "It's far from me. I have no idea." And so,
We'll learn one day.
well, I think the red heifer was the idea of Solomon didn't have something. We have something Solomon didn't have. We're not near as smart as he is, but we have one thing he didn't have: hindsight. And I think the concept is Yeshua is that red heifer. And the whole sacrifice, where he was crucified at and all that, I think he's symbolic. Not that his blood was done like the red heifer, but I'm saying he's symbolic of the red heifer, just mainly where it was at. And so I'm thinking there's a lot of things that, if you don't have hindsight, you can't see it. But once you have hindsight, you can actually see those things. Because we're not as smart as Solomon. I'm not saying that at all, but we do have hindsight. And so now, this deal right here about once you're completely leprous, then you're pronounced clean. 5 years from now, we may say, oh, we know exactly what that is. The sacrifices start. Now everybody in the world has been bashing Israel, saying bad things. Social media, everybody badmouths everybody. Not everybody, but my point is there's so much Lashon Hara, is that what if all of a sudden the sacrifice, because rabbis say that only happens with the sacrificial system, with the temple. Or not, well, I won't say temple, with the sacrificial system. So what if the sacrifices start, and now all of a sudden you see this disease popping up, this skin disease, or all these super wealthy movie stars, blah, 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 all getting a filthy, skanky whatever, and then we look back and say, that's that verse. We can't say now, but it could be.
There's already an incident of leprosy breaking out in Florida right now.
Now, the rabbis say it's different, but I'm not sure it's a totally different, because you got to remember with Gehazi, Naaman, when Elisha healed Naaman, when he told him to go down and dip in the Jordan 7 times, when he comes back, he tells Gehazi, he said, leprosy will stick to you and your family forever. In the modern day leprosy, it does go down through the family line. And so we know that it may be, I'm not saying it's the exact same thing, but modern day leprosy has a lot of the traits that leprosy in Scripture had, because it did.
So, for example, modern day leprosy is not called leprosy anymore. It's called Hansen's disease.
It's called what?
Hansen's disease.
Okay.
And Hansen's disease, you are, if you get it, it means you have the genetic marker that allows you to get it. Not everybody can get leprosy. You could go rub yourself all over somebody with leprosy. If you're not genetically predisposed to get it, you won't get it. So I think that's Gehazi's line. I think that's Gehazi's descendants. Those people are descended somehow from Gehazi, because Scripture says that. So one of the ways that you can get leprosy in the United States is the 9-banded armadillo carries it. So do not touch armadillo.
Good to know, because I like to touch
Don't-
little animals
Don't
and
touch
stuff.
armadillos or eat them, or which we wouldn't anyway. But they are one of the carriers, very common carriers of modern day leprosy. The people in Florida probably got it from somebody who got it from. That's the most common means of transmission in the United States.
But I will say this.
The index. But if you're not genetically predisposed to get it, you can't get it.
But hold on.
That's why people can go to India and work in leper colonies and never get it, like Mother Teresa.
But hold on. Now, adding to that, if it's not the same what the rabbi says what we have today, then maybe the difference is that the biblical leprosy could go on anybody that spoke Lashon Hara. And so right now it has to be predisposed to what she's saying, but maybe the difference is biblical leprosy is at that point, well, but I'm saying, but maybe when it becomes, the sacrifices start again, then maybe it opens up that it can go to anybody for those reasons.
Because there'll be a way to be cleansed from it.
Exactly.
What Scripture describes as leprosy is not it's not a descriptor of Hansen's disease.
Right.
In the Middle Ages, they saw people with leprosy and they said, "Oh, this is what they're talking about in the Bible." But it's not. If you look at piece by piece, leprosy, modern day leprosy is not marked. Does not do the things that biblical leprosy does.
So maybe it's a watered down version that will kick back up when the sacrifices start.
I think it's a completely different disease.
And that's why they call it something.
That comes from the things in Scripture that it says. It's not a physical. It's just a spiritual component that affects the physical body.
Who was it?
Completely different disease. But Gehazi's descendants, I think that's very obviously
Predisposed.
for Gehazi that are predisposed to a skin disease that looks like this.
Now, can you imagine the sacrifices starting, and then all of a sudden, millions of people all over the world that are greedy, that are Lashon Hara, could you imagine all these fancy movie stars, all these news people that stand up there and tell us all these lies, and all of a sudden coming down with this skin disease? I mean, that would be pretty obvious.
Now, comparing leprosy to sin, in our next Torah portion, it talks about the land vomiting them out, and that's when they've done abominations, and so those things can be considered abominations. Being greedy, Lashon Hara, and so I just think it's interesting that the very next Torah portion after this one, it talks about the land vomiting out the inhabitants that are in abomination.
Now, the best part about that is, think about this, that right there tells us that the earth is like a human being, a physical human being. Now, think of what I'm talking about. So you have bones, the earth has rocks. You have skin, the earth has soil. You have water, the earth has water. The human body is how much water, and the earth is how much. Exactly, and most of the earth is water. Now, with that being said, that's why I use the argument that the blood of the earth is oil. I don't think oil is fossil fuel. I think it's actually the blood of the earth. And you can donate blood as long as you don't give too much. Then you can kill the host. But with that concept, the earth will vomit you out. When you get sick, you vomit out that.
It's a poison.
Exactly. You're getting rid of the poisons, the toxins. Now, the earth has long hair too. You got the Amazons, the big, huge trees. You got your beard, you got your hair. Now, it's not wrong to shave some of it sometimes, but imagine Nazarite with this big, or somebody like Samson, long, long hair. That's like the rainforest down in Brazil. But think about what I'm saying. And once it cut it, it's gone. I mean, it takes 1,000 years for it to build back up. But what I am trying to say is that if you think about the earth like a human body, it's pretty cool. You start realizing exactly what's going on.
Well, actually, I do. It's because the way I was taught. And your point about taking too much, like, for example, out of the Amazons, they found any number of new disease strains that were released from the earth once that all this was clear cut.
Yeah.
And also, I came to find out, and this just astonished me, that you would think that that would be some of the richest farmland ever once that had been cleared. It's not. They have to add soil because what will support the lushness of the Amazon forest will not support crops.
Speaking of the Amazon, where most of the fertilizer, the soil comes from? I mean, how do I explain this? No, I'm not talking about what we carry in. There's a jet stream that picks up in the Sahara, somewhere in Africa, in the Sahara Desert. It actually picks up the dust and carries it across, and it drops it on the Amazon. It was amazing when I read that article. I was like, oh, that is unbelievable. So the dust over there and all that is being carried over and dropped on Brazil or in the Amazon, and that's what's keeping it healthy and keeping it going and stuff.
Last year in Texas, we were getting covered in that Saharan dust.
That's what we're talking about. Yes, yes. Yeah. And I had no idea there was that much of it coming over. And that's actually fertilizing the Amazon forest, Beth.
Okay, so I made a mistake on my previous statement about the 11 times. It's actually, I didn't use lepers plural. So there's 6 more of those, which gives us a total of 18, which is also an interesting number, because the digital root of that is 9, which is judgment.
Okay.
Still a much smaller number than I thought it would be.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go down to
Verse 13.
verse 13.
And he shall slay the lamb in the place where he says the sin offering and the ascending offering in a set apart place. For the guilt offering, like the sin offering, belongs to the priest. It is most set apart. And the priest shall take some of the blood of the guilt offering, and the priest shall put it on the tip of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. And the priest shall take some of the log of oil and pour it into the palm of his own left hand. And the priest shall dip his right finger in the oil that is in his left hand, and shall sprinkle some of the oil with his finger 7 times before Yah. And of the rest of the oil in his hand, the priest puts some of the tip of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the blood of the guilt offering. And the rest of the oil that is in the priest's hand, he puts on the head of him who is to be cleansed. And the priest shall make atonement for him before Yah. And the priest shall make the sin offering and make atonement for him who is to be cleansed from his uncleanness. Then afterwards, he slays the ascending offering. And the priest shall offer the ascending offering and the grain offering on the slaughter place. And the priest shall make atonement for him, and he shall be clean.
Okay. Let's talk about the sacrificial system for a minute. So, 2,000 years ago, first of all, can you imagine how complicated a priest's life is? There's certain things, like an Asham is most holy, has to be eaten. And if you don't eat it, then it has to be burnt. You can't just let other, it's not something you can share with anybody, because only a son of Aaron that can do this. And so, imagine how complicated it is. I read an article once, the daughter of a priest has one of the most complicated jobs of anybody. The wife of a priest, the daughter of a priest. Why is that? Because there are certain times you cannot touch teruma. You cannot touch priestly offerings. You cannot touch, certain times of the month, there are certain things you cannot touch. And if you do, it has to be burnt. And just reading the procedure of a priestess daughter, the things that she has to go through, it's totally amazing. I mean, we're talking about highly educated. We're not talking about just taking things randomly. They got to know what they're doing. And the same thing with the priest. They got to know what they're doing. They got to know who's to eat this, who's not to eat this, and all of that. If it's teruma, if it's kodesh, there's different levels of teruma, kodesh. Kodesh means that thing went on the altar. And so everything has a different level of accountability and stuff. Anyway, okay.
Verse 21. But if he is poor and is unable to afford it, then he shall take 1 male lamb as a guilt offering to be waved, to make atonement for him, and 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil as a grain offering, and a log of oil, and 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, such as he is able to afford. And one shall be a sin offering, and the other an ascending offering. And he shall bring them to the priest on the 8th day for his cleansing, to the door of the tent of appointment before Yah. And the priest shall take the lamb of the guilt offering and the log of oil, and the priest shall wave them as a wave offering before Yah. And he shall slay the lamb of the guilt offering, and the priest shall take some of the blood of the guilt offering, and put it on the tip of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot.
Stop for a second. Hey, Beth, Google on you ain't got that how many people were they anointed on the right? The priesthood was anointed the right thumb, right ear, and the right big toe. Now here, a Metzora, you take that oil and put it on the right thumb, the right ear, and the right toe. But there was somebody else. Was it not a Nazarite that purified when they... Am I wrong about that? But let's talk about that. Why the right ear? Why the right thumb?
The anointing of Aaron
Who? Right, at the beginning.
In Exodus 29:20, Leviticus 8:23, the blood of, if I can open it without losing this,
I'm thinking the Nazarites were in there too.
the ram of ordination,
That's at the beginning.
is Leviticus 14:4. 14:17, talks about the being on the priest, the tip, on the priest who is to be cleansed. Leviticus 14:25 is
Okay, she's looking that up, and let's talk about it for a minute. So again,
guilt offering, the blood of the lamb of the guilt offering, and that is, yeah, that's just the guilt offering, and then the last reference here is 14:28, that's oil, and that's also guilt offering. I don't see,
okay, that's good. Anyways, the ideal is the right ear to hear the word of God, the right thumb to carry out his will, and the right toe to walk in his halakha. And so let's go back 2,000 years ago, and the verse we read this morning during the drash, Peter cuts off the right ear of the Sagan, the servant of the Kohen Gadol. And so it's saying you didn't hear the word of God, but Yeshua stops and heals it. It's saying, but you will. And so the biggest problem we see today, especially in Hollywood and stuff, anytime you see about Yeshua, like the Passion or anything, it always makes the priesthood out to be the most evilest people around. Many believers of the priesthood believed in Yeshua, many of them. And so you got to understand is that that's one thing that you got to get out of our head, because we've been conditioned, just like everybody else. We're conditioned in our surroundings. We're conditioned in what we watch on TV. A lot have seen The Passion. A lot of you see these biblical movies, and they always make the priest out of the most evil people around.
The Chosen, like, is borderline, but I do like the way that they actually show that some of the Pharisees are like, okay, we like this Yeshua guy,
Okay.
but all of the Sadducees they don't like him.
So, and that's funny because that's a lie, because Yeshua says many of the priests believed in him, and 90% of the priests, from what I understand, I can't put a number on it, but the majority of the priesthood were Sadducees. And it said many of the priests believed in Yeshua. So,
Well, I know that the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, a lot of them.
but the main thing was about the spiritual concept. There's a lot of things, anyway. So, with that in mind, we have to look at what Yeshua said when Peter cut off the servant's ear. It had to be done, and then Messiah stopped Peter and said, but you will. So if we look at it on that level, he didn't cut off his right toe, and he didn't cut off the right thumb. He only cut off the right ear. And, we got to be careful not read too much into that, because too many times we do, especially Hollywood. Especially when Mel Gibson's making a movie about the Passion. The priesthood are the most evilest people around, and they're not. I know. Yeah.
He's not going to make them look any good at all.
But think about it. It's not just the Passion. It's a lot of different movies. The priesthood is always the enemy. And, yeah. So, okay. Let's go. What verse are we on? I stopped you right in the middle of
We're in verse 26.
Okay.
Then the priest pours some of the oil into the palm of his own left hand, and the priest shall sprinkle with his right finger some of the oil that is in his left hand 7 times before Yah. And the priest shall put some of the oil that is in his hand on the tip of the right ear of him who is to be cleansed, and on the thumb and on the right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot, on the place of the blood and the guilt offering. And the rest of the oil that is in the priest's hand he puts on the head of him who is to be cleansed, to make atonement for him before Yah. And he shall prepare one of the turtle doves or young pigeons, such as he is able to afford. That which he is able to afford, the one as a sin offering, and the other as an ascending offering, with the grain offering. And the priest shall make atonement for him, who is to be cleansed before Yah. This is the Torah for one who has had an infection of leprosy, who is unable to afford for his cleansing. And Yah spoke to Moshe and to Aharon, saying, when you come into the land of Canaan, which I am giving you as a possession, and I put a plague of leprosy in a house in the land of your possession, then shall the one who owns the house come and inform the priest, saying, it seems to me that there is some plague in the house. And the priest shall command, and they shall empty the house before the priest goes in to look at the plague, so that all that is in the house is not made unclean.
Wait, where you at? What verse?
Verse 36.
36. Okay, let's look at context for a second. Now, if you suspect leprosy in your house, what's the first?
Mold, right?
Well, black mold is a little different.
I will say, there's interesting things that have happened. I've seen a person that's like super, super rotten, and they've moved into a brand new house, no mold, and all of their previous houses had mold in them, and they moved into this brand new, they built it house, and it started forming mold in it. So I think there's definitely something
Spiritual.
to the mold.
Because when
Yeah.
you read like in the last Torah portion, it's talking about, like the garments. It almost sounds like a mold or like a fungus or something that's growing in the garments.
Actually, the leper, well, hold on. Look at Gehazi. What did Gehazi do? So when he went to Naaman, Naaman said, I got all this wealth and all these clothes and really fancy stuff I'll give you. And Gehazi said, Elisha said, no, keep it. I don't want it. But Gehazi said, I'll take it. So he took it. And so if it's in the clothes, then now Gehazi's got it and he's got it on him. And so regardless of whatever it was, Elisha made it clear that now Gehazi's going to go down your bloodline forever. But it was in the clothing. So it was a spiritual, whether it's spiritual or not, it was in the clothing. But look at what he's telling the Cohen here. But if you know a Cohen's coming to your house, if you suspect leprosy, what does he say?
Get everything out.
Before he gets there. Why? Because when he speaks it, it's done. When the Cohen, and that's funny to think about when you understand what he's saying. When the Cohen comes in and speaks, says it's leprous. Now, everything that's left in there is, you do not take it out. It's trash. And so, but he tells you beforehand. And that's kind of weird, isn't it, when you think about it? So it's saying that the Cohen, there's something in his lip. When he literally pronounces it, it's over. Whatever he pronounces happens.
That's interesting because, like, when Yeshua speaks, it's final too.
It's final.
So
Exactly. And so,
perfect.
and so we always overlook that until you really stop and think about it. Now the Cohen has the power to declare everything in a home unclean, period. It's just unclean. Once he says it, it's done. And it's like the Kohen Gadol speaks for Elohim. You ever think about that? How do we know he speaks for Elohim? There's one place in Scripture that shows us exactly that he speaks for Elohim, for the Father. Where is that? You guys remember the story of Hannah going to the temple and praying? And that's before she had Samuel. She's wanting a baby. She's got no baby. And she's going to the temple. She's crying. And Eli says, get out of here, woman. You're drunk. And she said, no, my heart's torn apart. And he says, he don't even ask her what she's asking for. He says, then it'll happen. Whatever your petition is, it'll happen. And she got pregnant that year. Yep. You ever thought about that? So the Kohen Gadol literally speaks for the Father. Now the rabbis talk about the prophet Elijah. You remember the story when those I think there were 40 kids were cursing Elijah, calling him an old bald-headed man. You remember that? Mm-hmm. And he cursed them and said these two bears came out and killed them all. Or I don't remember. I don't remember how many there were. But anyway, those two bears came out and killed them all. So the rabbis point out something later on that happened in Elijah's life where he was actually punished for that. But the Father still honored what he said and did exactly what Elijah said. Well, think about it from a different... reason I'm saying that is because think about being a prophet, having that kind of power, but realizing that, yeah, God will do it, but then if you did it wrong, he's going to turn around and punish you for it. And that's something, we see in the story of Elijah, I'd have to go back to that story and look how the rabbis, because there's something happened later on in his life where they can prove that this was because of what he did right here. And so I can respect that now now I understand it more. Why it happened, because Elijah was mad, calling him a bald-headed old man, but at the same time, it wasn't what he should have done. You follow what I'm saying?
They were being outrageous to him too.
They were.
Calling him names.
They were.
They were being really mean to him.
Right. But if the rabbis are right, then he should have been a little more patient with them and not lost his cool quite as fast. Or maybe not punished them to death. Maybe just punished them to, yeah. And see, that would be the hard part of being a prophet, is knowing how much and not going too far. Because he says the same thing about Nebuchadnezzar. He said, Nebuchadnezzar was mine. I used Nebuchadnezzar to punish Israel, but then Nebuchadnezzar went too far, and I punished him. So, Yah will do whatever he wants to do, but the point is if you're the one he's using to do it, don't go too far. Just do the bare minimum of what he tells you to do. I guess that's the way you're looking at it. Okay. We are on verse
37.
37.
And he shall look at the plague and see if the plague is on the walls of the house with sunken places, greenish or reddish, which appear to be deep in the wall. Then the priest shall go out of the house to the door of the house and shut up the house 7 days. And the priest shall come again on the 7th day and look and see if the plague has spread on the walls of the house. Then the priest shall command, and they shall remove the stones with the plague in them, and they shall throw them outside the city into an unclean place, while he lets the house be scraped inside all around, and the dust that they scrape off they shall pour out in an unclean place outside the city. And they shall take other stones and put them in place of those stones, and take other mortar and plaster the house.
Stop. So Beth and I, we went to Israel in 2016, and where was that city, Beth, that was down on it was on the, where the hypoderm was? Caesarea. They had a wall they were excavating, and they had dug down this wall, and there's these potsherds, broken pots and stuff, and this was a dump. And I mean, it was as high as you can imagine. So every time something would come unclean, an earthen vessel, you break it and make you a new pot. But you didn't use that old, what you broke. I mean, it was done away with. And so when it says take it to a spot that's unclean, it's like a city dump. Like a landfill. Yeah, exactly. Except the stuff they dumped then was not like the stuff we dump. I mean, we're destroying landfills too. But the stuff they were dumping, all recycled, blah, blah, blah. But it was clean and unclean on a spiritual level. It was tameh. Tahor means clean, tameh means unclean. And so here, you say you get leprosy on the wall, you scrape it off, catch the dust, scrape it off, and take all that out to an unclean place, and then do it. And now, there was other places where like the ash from the altar, it would go out of the temple, but it wasn't in an unclean place. It went to a very special place where all the ash was kept. And you remember the bird offerings. They'd pop their heads off, and then they'd throw the rest of the bird offering in the ash heap, and all of that went out to a special place. So you had clean places and unclean places, and you didn't mix them. Some of the sin offerings, everything was burnt. They went out to a clean place at the temple where they kept everything special, kept everything from getting unclean. So that's an important concept that we don't really comprehend, the clean and unclean. It's a spiritual concept. But even though it's a spiritual concept, we apply it in a literal sense with the table. So as Americans, we're taught, one thing, you wash your hands before you eat, right? Well, the rabbis say your table is an altar. And the priests would wash their hands before they come before the altar of God, just like the table is an altar. Therefore, that we do it in a physical sense, what was actually a spiritual concept, if that makes sense. Okay, go.
So, back to what I was saying a minute ago about mold, in our sense, in my head, I'm thinking about wood, right, or sheetrock, or whatever we use today. But how crazy is it to think of that something like that going inside of stone?
Yeah.
To me, it's a whole like stone is.
Yes and no.
Can even
But hold on. Stone are more moist. When you start building out of stone, see, our houses are made a lot different. Every house I've been into that's built down into the ground, modern construction, a lot of them have mold problems, big time. I don't know if it's the same kind of mold. I think they're saying it's even a different kind of mold, but it is mold. The first building we were in leaked like a sift, and we had to finally leave because people were getting sick from the mold. And so, you got to be careful. Can you imagine your house, what you get for your house, and a priest come in and say, okay, you got to scrape it down. And then the third time he said, okay, the whole thing's unclean. You can't go back in. Yeah, my bank ain't going to go for that. You see what I'm saying, though? I mean, things are a lot different what they used to be. So that's one of those things where there has to be new laws when Yeshua returns to tell us how to deal with things that we have today that they didn't have back then.
One of the things I was curious about reading it is it says, they shall scrape the stones, they shall remove the stones.
Who is they?
They shall.
The leper.
Is it the priest?
No, the leper.
That lives in the home?
The priest tells them what to do, and they take care of it.
Okay. I just wondered if they had, I forget what the name of the society is, but the society that comes in and takes care of dead bodies. Because it's so ritualized and so full of law, they have specific.
Now, you may be right about that. I don't know. They have a specific group that deals with dead bodies. And it's like, okay, so.
And they go all over the world as needed. I mean, if
So,
they would come here and take care of the body.
there was a synagogue shooting, I forget where it was at, and the group she's talking about came in. They literally scraped all the blood off everything and buried it with
If it was on the ceiling tile, they cut that piece out of the ceiling tile and everything was buried.
the blood. And, whether you agree or whether you don't, you got to respect somebody take that much effort in the blood, when that's important. That's very important. And so, so you're saying there may be a special group that deals with remodeling. Okay, so can you imagine being a contractor? I've done everything in my life. I built houses, cabinets, whatever. So now I'm going to decide, well, in my last few years, I'm going to specialize in leprosy removal and asbestos removal. Think about it.
I have companies that do that.
We forgot. It's your fault. Okay, we'll give thanks before we close the Torah portion. All right, we forgot to give thanks. It's all Beth's fault. She got us going down something else.
All right, we're in verse 43. Same chapter. I'm a slow reader, I'm sorry. Verse 43, and if plague comes back and breaks out in the house, after he has removed the stones, after he has scraped the house, and after it is plastered, then the priest shall come in and look and see, and if the plague has spread in the house, it is an active leprosy in the house, clean. And he shall break down the house, its stones and its timber, and all the plaster of the house, and he shall bring them outside the city to the unclean place. And he who goes into the house all the days while it is shut up, become unclean until evening. And he who lies down in the house has to wash his garments, and he who eats in the house has to wash his garments. However, if the priest indeed comes in and looks at it and sees that the plague has not spread in the house after the house was plastered, then the priest shall pronounce the house clean, because the plague is healed. And to cleanse the house, he shall take 2 birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet, and hyssop. And he shall slay one of the birds in the earthen vessel over the running water, and he shall take the cedar wood, and the hyssop, and the scarlet, and the live bird, and dip them in the blood of the slain bird, and in the running water, and shall sprinkle the house 7 times. He shall thus cleanse the house with the blood of the bird, and the running water, and the live bird, and with the cedar wood, and with the hyssop, and with the scarlet. And he shall let the live bird loose outside the city in the open field, and shall make atonement for the house, and it shall be clean. This is the Torah for any infection of leprosy and eruption, and of leprosy of the garment, and of a house, and for a swelling, and for a scab, and for a bright spot, to teach when it is unclean and when it is clean. This is Torah of leprosy.
Of all the laws of a Cohen, leprosy, Metzora, this one would be really one of the most complicated. Everything else, you read about it. I mean, take a little getting used to. You can figure it out. But this one here, you'd have to know what you're doing because a lot of people's lives are involved in this. You could really mess up somebody's life if you know what you're doing. Beth.
There's an interesting progression here. If you look at it as a progressive thing, it starts in your house. The house is where you learn your attitude and behavior. It speaks of what you learn from your environment and family. Then it moves to your clothes. It moves a little bit closer to you. You put on those behaviors and clothe yourself in them, and it becomes your outward appearance. And then, if it still hasn't been gotten rid of, it moves to your body, where you internalize the negative behavior, it becomes a part of you, it becomes a generational curse.
Spiritual, from physical to the spiritual.
Right.
Okay. Chapter 15. Who wants to read?
No, it's okay. I want to. You gotta trade me. Said trade me. Okay, chapter 15. Adonai said to Moshe and Aaron, "Tell the people of Israel, when any man has a discharge from his body, the discharge is unclean. The discharge is unclean no matter whether it continues flowing or has stopped. It is still his uncleanliness. Every bed which the person with the discharge lies on is unclean, and everything he sits on is unclean. Whoever touches his bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Whoever sits on anything the person with the discharge sat on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches the body of the person with the discharge is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge spits on someone who is clean, the latter is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening."
Stop a minute. Now, this don't mean just walk up spitting. This means when you're talking to somebody, sometimes people, when they talk, blah, 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 spit out, and that's what it means. So one of the Kohen Gadols years ago, not years, 1,000 years ago, one of the Kohen Gadols had 4 brothers, and his mother asked him to make sure that all 5 of them serve as Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. And so this one was anointed, and he would literally go out around the people, and then somebody would actually talking to him. He could feel him spit on him and whatever. Then he let one of his other brothers take over the Kohen Gadol for that Yom Kippur. And so it's just kind of interesting that we're not talking about just literally spitting on somebody. We're just talking about just talking to somebody, and you get spit on you by accident. And you pull up, now a lot of you don't realize this, but you pull up to a gas station, somebody spit out there and you step in it, same thing. You realize that? So it's on the ground, and you step in it, now you're unclean. And so that, of course, that goes into different arguments at different levels of unclean, different things like that. But it is, that is one of the things they factor in.
Is there a commandment of where we're supposed to spit?
Rabbinically, yes.
That's
Rabbinically, no. But rabbinically, but this is common sense. Think about this. They would say, so the court would say, was it during the festivals or not during the festivals? And people say, well, what difference does it make? Well, during the festival, there's so many people, respectable people, would spit on the side of the wall, off the sidewalk when nobody's walking. And illiterate people would just spit on, where everybody's walking. Now think about what I'm saying. So you go and you got this guy that just spits right in front of everybody, and you're just like, man, could you not go over there and spit off the side of the road? And so, but think about that. And so there is, yes. But it's not biblically, but it is responsibly.
respectfully, yeah.
Respectfully, exactly. Verse 9.
It's like Hammy just knowing to go to.
Yeah, he'll go back up into a bush to poop instead of pooping where people walk. He's a good dog.
When we were, I got to tell one thing. So we're in Israel, and in the old city, there was this walkway. And they literally had this corner, and the state come in and built this thing in the corner where it wasn't actually a corner, it was kind of rounded. And one of the guys, I don't know if I saw this on the internet. This tour guy was explaining, he said, you know why this is rounded? And of course, everybody's like, why? He said, because people come up here and pee in the corner. The Arabs would come up there and pee in the corner. So they rounded it where there literally wasn't a place for them to pee in the corner. Okay.
Verse 9.
We've seen a lot of things. I mean, some of those guys are pretty disgusting. They really are.
It's even worse than Amsterdam.
Yeah,
You just pee wherever you want to. It doesn't matter.
yeah,
Like, it doesn't matter. Anywhere.
yeah. Well, I think some in Israel still have that attitude too. Jews don't, but the other flip side, anyway. Okay, verse 9.
Any saddle that the person with the discharge rides on will be unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him will be unclean until evening. He who carries those things is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge fails to rinse his hands in water before touching someone, that person is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge touches a clay pot, it must be broken. If he touches a wooden utensil, it must be rinsed in water. When a person with the discharge has become free of it, he is to count 7 days for his purification. Then he is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in running water. After that, he will be clean. On the 8th day, he is to take for himself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, come before Adonai to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and give them to the Cohen. The Cohen is to offer them, the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus the Cohen will make atonement for him on the account of his discharge before Adonai. If a man has a seminal emission, he is to bathe his entire body in water. He will be unclean until evening. Any clothing or leather on which there is any semen is to be washed with water. It will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bed with a woman and has sexual relations, both are to bathe themselves in water. They will be unclean until evening.
Okay, hold on. Stop there. Okay, so you got one group of, I'm not sure which one exactly it is. You know, the Haredis, there's so many different groups of Haredi. But one of them, Friday night is the night for intercourse. It's special, it's during the week, it's Oneg Shabbat, they call it. Well, Oneg Shabbat is when we eat our food. But they say Friday night is the night for intercourse. But the problem is, this is my problem I have with it. Shabbat, you know, right now we're all unclean. I will admit that. I mean, we've all touched dead bodies. We're all spiritually unclean. But I always tell people, I said, practice a cleanness. And imagine if you'd been sprinkled with the red heifer. So I'm raising the bar a little bit because we're not. We're all unclean. But imagine we're not. And try to come before Yah in a clean, you know. If you've had sex with your wife the night before, the next day you're unclean. And so if you were going to do that, I mean, now I'm talking about practicing like if you were actually going to the temple, and in a lot of Orthodox groups that come into the synagogue is the concept of like going to the temple. It's not like a home study group, it's a step up, but it's not going to the temple either. It's like an in-between. And so you would want to practice, if you want to start practicing clean and unclean in a common sense way, first of all, you have to admit we're all unclean. So anytime anybody asks you, you wouldn't say, I can't touch you because you're unclean. People need to understand, I'm just trying to practice this, that when I am sprinkled with the red heifer, then I understand everything I'm doing. And so some of the, like I said, this group of Haredis, a lot of them, they call it, you can Google it, look at it online. They call it Oneg Shabbat. Shabbat's supposed to be special, so that's the night they all, whatever. I disagree. I say coming before Yah is become before God, you want to be in a clean state as possible. But again, I know we're all unclean, so I am factoring that in. But now let's talk about at the temple. So the Kohanim would go work at the temple. Now, I think Hasatan, literally the Spirit, had all kind of fun with the Kohanim at the temple because there was actually a phenomenon that happened with these young men that would go work at the temple that have wet dreams. So, I'm serious. They would, because you don't have your wife there with you that week. You're there all week long by yourself at the temple. You work for a week at a time. And they would have these dreams and become unclean. It's called Baal-Keri, Baalkeri. And it's actually a phenomenon that quite a few of them went through. And they had to leave the very next morning, early that morning. They had to get up and go out. They had to leave the temple ground until sundown. And at sundown, they take a mikvah, then they could come back in and be ready for the next day's work.
What about what they emissioned on?
Well, anything they were sitting on was unclean. It had to be taken too. But they can mikvah it, and then that afternoon they come back, it was clean. It wasn't like it was be thrown away or anything like that. It's just so.
Unless it was clay.
It was clean.
I want to know how that would happen.
Now, Now, in that context, you would want it not only just spiritually clean, you would want it physically clean. So we want physically and spiritually. So, Patrick.
Break clay. Why break clay and clean wood? What's there to be clay and wood? It absorbs it.
Clay is like he was saying, it holds moisture.
Okay, so when we were in, okay, so anytime you have an earthen pot, when it says earthen pot in here, that is a clay vessel. Because everything back then, you know, we got Tupperware and all that today, but back then everything was clay. They, you know, the potters, they were, that's a big, good money.
Right.
And so they made all these clay pots, and then they heated them up, and then they sold them. And so a potter in those days, that was a livelihood. That was, you know, probably a pretty good job at that time. And so, but when we were in Israel, in Caesarea, like I said, we got this one, they were excavating in this dump, and they literally left the wall straight down, and you could see probably thousands of years of unclean stuff they would go out and throw in that area. And, you know, those potsherd, once they're kilned, they never melt again. I mean, it's like glass. You know, they stay in there forever. And the really cool thing is in the old city of David, in the Davidson Center, they put these stones down, and then they took all these potsherds and put them up like a little area. It's so beautiful the way they did it.
They put the potsherds vertically down in the ground between the paving stones.
And smashed them off so they wasn't sharp.
It really was very pretty.
Yeah.
And it was just, they have so many of them. It's like, we would think, gosh, you would think they would be worth something because they're so old, but they're really not because there's so many. And so they use them for grout in some of the,
And you can't take them with you because it's part of the, so. But anytime you have a clay vessel, if it becomes unclean, it's to be broken. Now, if it's metal, you burn it and clean it and all that off. You get it back up to a good state.
And we're considered clay pots. I mean, we're referred to as clay vessels,
Yeah,
and we have to be
earthen.
broken in order to
Yes,
become new.
yes, you're
Whoa,
right.
that's so cool.
It is.
I never even thought about that. That's neat. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that is good. That is good. That is good. So, relations, sexual relation causes the man and the woman to both be unclean, and until sundown. Then you mikvah, and at sundown you're clean. Now, got to remember, nearly every time it says you're unclean for 7 days, you're unclean for this, whatever, you know, you go through a mikvah, but you're still not clean until sundown. It's a process, and I think the word they use is tevel yom, and this is a rabbinic phrase that means you've already mikvahed, but you're still not clean yet until sundown. And then at sundown, you're automatically clean. And so, but there is that time frame. And you have to understand that. It's not just a mikvah. There is a time frame. And then once you go through the time frame, then you're spiritually clean. And now the funny thing is at the temple, if I ain't mistaken, when you had to go use the restroom, not do number 2, they always mikvahed. They always mikvahed after you did, number 2. Now, just do number 1, no, it isn't no big deal. But number 2, you had to mikvah. And so I'm not sure exactly where they get that from, but I did read that, and so that was a priesthood at the temple. Now, you got to remember, at the temple, there's a lot of cool things happen at the temple, just the ideal of it. Number 1, before you went into the temple, you had to go through a mikvah, but you didn't have to wait till sundown. I don't understand that, because every place else you go through a mikvah, then at sundown you're clean. To go to the temple, you got to be clean to start with, but then you still go through there's an Olympic, what was the name of that pool, Beth? Shalom? Pool of Siloam? So when Yeshua heals the man the pool of Siloam is actually, right. So here's the Temple Mount, and the city of David is over here, and this is why, and I'm not trying to step on toes, this is why I don't believe this is the Temple Mount. The Gihon Spring is right here, and they run 5 football fields underground, and the Siloam Spring is down here that you went through a mikvah before you went up into the temple. Why would you walk a quarter mile back to here? Because anybody touches you in between that, you're unclean again. Yeah, so anyways, that's my biggest argument is I believe this right here, because everything you see in Israel, they show a little corner thing right here, like a guard shack sticking up, and they said that was a Roman fortress. Roman fortress had 50,000 people. That right there, you could easily put with what was underneath it or whatever, that could easily be in the Roman fortress, and then the actual temple in the city of David. Because another argument I use is in Zechariah, it says water will come up to the right side of the altar. And if this right here caves in, if they have an earthquake, there's a shaft right there called Warren Shaft in Gihon Springs right here. I think, this is my theory, I think that was where they lowered the labor for the temple, and then they go this way. And if that was to cave in, that water would literally boil up because it's a siphon spring. And the water would literally come out. In Zechariah, it says water comes out to the right side of the altar and it forms a river. Well, the water is already there. And you got people waiting for something to happen up here. Now, I disagree. The water is right there. And it's already a huge spring. And if I was a king and I was going to build the most high a temple, I would build right over the top of the water source. It just makes common sense. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you. I'm trying to think of anything else the priest did that was kind of weird. There's a lot of things like that about the clean and unclean that we don't comprehend. And you wonder how important it is? Go to the hippie village. You know what the hippie village is? Qumran. Qumran is, Beth, when we went there, it was a little bitty small place. And how many mikvahs did it have?
You could trip and fall into a mikvah with every step.
They were,
And some of them were huge and very deep.
and not just were they mikvahs, they had a thing down the middle of the steps. And a little wall about this tall. They would go down in the mikvah, then they would come up this way. They didn't want anybody going in and touch them once they come out. I'm serious. It was so cool. But they call it the hippie village because they were like the modern day hippies. They really were. That was Qumran. And
Clean hippies?
But that's where we think that John grew up probably in that area. One of the things said they took orphan priesthood children and taught them stuff. So, John may have actually grew up there. We don't know. But it is cool. It's called the hippie village. And that was the modern hippies. But they were really into clean and unclean. There's no doubt about it. There was more mikvahs there than we've seen at the Temple Mount with everybody at the Temple Mount. They were just a little bitty community, had probably 5 or 6 mikvahs. And that's for a little bitty town, not much bigger than 10 acres. That's a lot of mikvahs. Okay, go.
Verse 19. If a woman has a discharge and the discharge from her body is blood, she will be in her state of niddah for 7 days. Whoever touches her will be unclean until evening. Everything she lies on or sits on in her state of niddah will be unclean. Whoever touches her bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything she sits on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. As soon as he touches the bed or something she sat on, he will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bed with her and her menstrual flow touches him, he will be unclean 7 days, and every bed he lies on will be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days not during her period, or if her discharge lasts beyond the normal end of her period, then throughout the time she is having an unclean discharge, she will be as when she is in niddah. She is unclean. Every bed she lies on at any time while she is having her discharge will be for her like the bed she uses during her time of niddah. And everything she sits on will be unclean with uncleanliness like that of the time of her niddah. Whoever touches those things will be unclean. He is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If she has become free of her discharge, she is to count 7 days. After that, she will be clean. On the 8th day, she is to take for herself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the Kohen at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to offer the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for her before Adonai on account of her unclean discharge. In this way, you will separate the people of Israel from their uncleanliness so that they will not die in a state of uncleanliness for defiling my tabernacle, which is there with them. Such is the law for the person who has a discharge, for the man who has a seminal emission that makes him unclean, for the woman in niddah during her menstrual period, for the person, man or woman with a discharge, and for the man who has sexual relations with a woman who is unclean.
Okay. Okay, there was something I want to talk about. Okay, so you don't have to, I may be mistaken about this, but I don't think so. I don't think this has anything to do with your monthly period. It does, but anything outside the 7 days, then you got to bring a turtle dove for at the temple. I don't think you had to take, am I wrong about that, Beth? Did a woman have to take every month a turtle dove at the temple? I don't think so. I think that's just outside the 7 days of her. And they usually don't last that long anyways. It's anything that's outside the 7 days, that would be, I may be wrong about that, but I don't think so. Now, imagine being a priest. Imagine you're married to a priest. He's working at the temple. That time of month, you're going to have to sleep in separate beds. And that's what Orthodox Judaism, a lot of them do anyway. They got separate beds except for when they come together. And so, well, anyway.
That's a fun conversation, right?
Yep. All right. I'm done. I'm tired. If you guys find any buildings, or you drive by somewhere, you see something, make sure you text Beth and we'll check on them. I know Ray's been looking. We've been looking. We've checked on some things. I mean, it's not like we hadn't checked.
See right here in town. I mean, like, the north side of Russellville, 7 would be okay. Atkins is a little far, and the only buildings I've seen there are pretty junky.
Yeah.